On today's Tech Help for Churches, creating local podcasts. Hi, and welcome again to another episode of Tech Help for Churches. This is the show where every week I help you with new media, social media, the internet for your church. My name is Paul Allen Clifford. I'm your host. So it occurred to me that while podcasts are international in flavor, while they don't have a problem with them being difficult to consume, you don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time to engage with them. They're international in nature, and most churches are more interested in helping their local community. So how do you go about making a podcast local? Well, you make local content. So these are going to be some outside of the box ideas that I had. I was just brainstorming through and I got quite a lot of them. And so these are different ideas of local podcasts that you can do that may not be explicitly Christian. They may not be explicitly something where you're reading out of the Bible necessarily, but maybe they're sponsored by your church. Maybe you invite people to your church at the end, etc. Maybe these are the kinds of things that you have a really involved volunteer create and then just mention in passing from time to time, hey, there's this great thing that fits into this going on at my church. So the first thought that of course popped into my mind was sports. Not because I'm big into the sport ball, because I'm not, but I was just thinking, what is inherently local that people are really into? Local sports. Now, of course, that might be a local professional team, or it might be a local college team. I live just outside of Lexington, Kentucky, so for us it's the University of Kentucky Wildcats. But that's not the only thing it could be. It could be local high school sports, something that people outside of the region, unless they're from here and just aren't around anymore, wouldn't necessarily care about. But sports can be very clean in what they are, and then you can use that as a bridge to starting conversations with people about other important things. Also, don't forget that for some places there are regional sports that are more important than they are in other places. You know, in the north, hockey is much more important than it is in, say, Florida. Well, in Florida, football is much more important than it is in, say, Kentucky and Indiana, where basketball is big. So there might be regional sports that are of greater impact. There also might be specific sports that maybe people haven't heard of before. Maybe they're very small. So like I happen to know that there is an ultimate frisbee league here in my local area. You probably haven't interacted with that very much, but there are little leagues all over, so that's an opportunity. It could be, too, that there are very, very specific local things that started, years and years ago with very specialized equipment, and they're just not big in other parts of the country. That would be an opportunity. Also, food. Food is a great thing that really connects people of all sorts of different backgrounds, and so there are local favorites. In Kentucky, the hot brown, Bargoo are two things that spring to mind. There are also local delicacies, things that you cannot get other places. Now, I'm using that term delicacy loosely because I'm not a foodie. What I mean by that is there a local soft drink? Is there a local chocolate? Is there something that when people move out of your area, they really, when they come back to visit family, they stock up on this stuff? Talk about that. So you could do something about that. You could do something about local culture. So you could, of course, talk about the arts, a big art exhibition in one place, big concerts in another place. That sort of thing. Big theater performances, little theater performances. There are also quirks about your location. Things that are culturally relevant only in your area. Now, this is going to be very similar to the sports that I was talking about, but here in Kentucky, and this isn't necessarily just money related or betting related, I've just been amazed at how across the board, all races, creeds, etc., we all seem to really be into horse racing. Now, maybe it's only once a year during the Kentucky Derby, but it tends to be something that this state really likes. So that would be something that's kind of a regional quirk, and it's also a local sport that really isn't as big in other parts of the country. Next, you could talk about parenting, about maybe a kid-centered event calendar, because parents are always thinking about, oh, well, what can I do with my kids? Well, if you had a weekly or monthly podcast with events that people could do with their kids, and maybe you even go out to some from the past and interview them and maybe bring those up next year, etc., you could really get some traction with that. You could talk about local news, stuff that local radio and television just don't cover, maybe positive stories, maybe stories about minor incidents that they just would think are too small to cover, or positive stories that they just overlook because that doesn't sell. You could think about local history. Think about, well, what happened on this date in 1832? Or what happened here in 1972? You could talk about historical events very easily, local history that may appeal to other people, but even more would it appeal to the locals. Then you could also do interviews. So you could find interesting people locally. Maybe they're not interesting enough to be on the national stage, but they're quirky characters all around. So maybe you could find those quirky characters and interview them. When someone would tune into a podcast like that, when they would subscribe, they'd really get, oh, I know that person, or I know that's a friend of a friend, and that could really draw them in. Next, you could do stuff for singles, events that are fun for singles. For couples, you could do a weekly date night ideas, especially centered around your local area. Hey, there's a great game going on. You and your special someone could take a picnic dinner and tailgate before the game, and then cheer on your team to victory. That could combine the date night and the sports. You could do a capital C church news update. So you could really collect what other churches are doing and think of this as something kingdom broadening, to say, I can't believe the great thing that the Christian church down the road is doing, and this awesome thing that the Methodists are doing, and this great thing that the Presbyterians are doing, and just share all these positive things. And maybe after a while, you could make it to where they send copies of their newsletter to you, or they email you updates of what they're planning, and then you could go from there. You could also, in this same vein, you could highlight any missions trips that they were doing, and it wouldn't need to be the case that you would necessarily highlight them all as they were happening. You could collect stories over a long period of time and do one a week. There's 52 weeks in a year, so do you think that there are somewhere within your local area 52 mission trips that are worth talking about? The youth of First Church went to Ethiopia, and a group of medical missionaries from the community church went to Uganda, things like that, and interview them, have them tell their stories, and you could really get a lot of traction there. Another thing is comedy. Now, there are quirks in your local area, things that people local to the area make fun of, and it's all in good fun. No one gets their feelings hurt, but it's kind of like it's something that makes you part of this group, and you could talk about the funny things that you do, the quirks that go on, if you've got someone that's particularly funny and can highlight those sorts of things. You could, and I'm going to admit that this might be controversial, but if you if your church is interested in spiritual warfare, as a lot are, maybe one thing to do is you could take a tour of haunted locations and just in general really interact with whatever's going on there, whether it's nothing or something that really needs some spiritual attention. That's something else you could do. Now, you could also talk about social justice stuff. So you could interview local nonprofits and see where they need help. Talk to people that are in charge of these organizations and see what they suggest you should do when you're interacting with people that actually need help. And you could just basically make this a place for information for those of us that want to help, but they don't want to hurt. You know, you don't want to do the wrong thing. You don't want to give money to someone that's addicted to drugs, but you do want to help someone who's just down on their luck, that really life has beat them up. Maybe they had a series of unfortunate events. You want to help them. And maybe someone in the local charities would have some advice on how to do that. Maybe they would talk about areas where they need help, whether it's monetary or maybe it's volunteers, etc. And you could get more people involved there. So those are just some of the ideas that I've had of different things that your church could do to really impact people, to really step into the local culture and live in it. And you know, in seminary we called it being incarnational. So maybe just growing into the culture, not in a way that you seem that you don't seem different, but in a way that you can inform it with biblical values and go from there. I do want to be very careful that as we're talking about this, this doesn't become a gripe session, that this doesn't become a, oh, the evil politicians in City Hall, or, oh, that other church, they're so bad. You know, any of that stuff. No. Let's be children of light that show what Christ is doing in the world and show good, clean fun that doesn't hurt anyone, that can really help people step into a community where they go, you know, I heard this guy's podcast, and I thought, you know, that's someone that I could like, and it turns out he's a Christian. And when they have a need where they think, well, you know, maybe I should go to a church, maybe they've already interacted with your podcast, and they think, well, you're not that weird after all. Or maybe it's something where you're just speaking truth, but speaking it with such love that it's attracting to people. So remember those things as you're creating your local podcasts and as you use this idea, amongst the others, to go out and change eternity. I hope that helped you, and I hope that that gives you some ideas beyond podcasting the sermon that you can use to impact those around you. If you like this content, why don't you head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com, and there I have all my resources. I have my newsletter, which is available for you for free. I have the churchtechcast.com screencast show and other shows that are targeted for you, the church techie, and I just have resources that I've created with you in mind to make either you more effective or help your team grow in their effectiveness. Until next time, this is Paul Allen Clifford with trinitydigitalmedia.com. Don't forget to leave your comments below the video, positive or negative, thumbs up, whatever. I'd just like to hear from you. Until next time, go out and change eternity.